Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another Lakers Q&A. It's been a couple weeks. I've had my son here on summer break, so I've been busy spending time with him, but wanted to tap in with you guys after a couple weeks since doing the last one. So whenever you guys start to populate and get your questions in, we will hop into that. Going to be going about 45 minutes to an hour and ready to touch on Thunder Pacers. If you guys want to touch on NBA Finals, free agency, trades, offseason needs, all that stuff. Shout out to J-Note. Shout out to Young Lido, Walter White, Fabian. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Boss Camp TV, Pieter K. What's up, everyone? Missed you guys. Can't Stop, True Fully, Gorilla. All right, Gorilla with the first question. Yo, is it worth developing Christian Koloko? I think so. I think depending on how the Lakers approach the center position this summer and how they just determine how, if it's going to be a trade or if it's going to be splitting up one of the exceptions across a couple guys, more of a center by committee. Regardless of their approach, I think Christian Koloko is worth a look as a third string center. So even if it is trading for a center and then maybe signing a minimum guy or a taxpayer MLE guy and then having another minimum option, I think Christian Koloko, to me, makes a lot of sense as a third string center, the 14th, 15th guy on the roster who you can just have there and see what he can develop into. I'm high on him. I think I'm high on him as a backup, but like longer term. But I think he's shown a lot of potential on the defensive end as a rebounder and even as a finisher around the basket. I think he has to improve his catching and finishing, develop into being more of a lob threat, but he is someone who I think has shown some flashes. And I think, especially compared to a guy like Trey Jemison, he's a bit younger, and I think his upside is higher on both sides of the ball. So I would be interested in Christian Koloko. Again, I think there are better options out there, so I'm not saying he should be the primary backup center. I'm not saying he should be on the roster necessarily. I just think depending on how things play out, I would be interested in him as a potential third-string center. David Furman asking, is Walker Kessler really available? I think there's some nuance here, right? Like every player is technically available. There are very few, if any, true untouchables in the league. I think the issue with Walker Kessler and with Utah in general is their asking prices tend to be higher. And I think to trade a Laurie or to trade a Walker, it is going to be a high price. And going back to last season, I reported that the Lakers had interest in Walker previously. They had inquired about him to the Jazz, and the feedback they got was the starting price, not the final price, but the starting price was the equivalent of 2+ first-round picks. So could you get there maybe with the Dalton Knecht and a first? Maybe. I would like to think that the Lakers, if they offered the Mark Williams package, before they did the Mark Williams trade, they would have offered that to Utah, and Utah would have likely said no. So I just don't know if they have the requisite assets to get a Walker Kessler, but I think he's likely available for the right price. I just think that price is very high, and I don't know if the Lakers can get to it. Walter White asks, who's the best player to get on the vet minimum? It's tough to say now, just because I think this was a year ago, right? June 9th, 2024. If you asked me this, I would not have said that a guy like a Gary Trent Jr. would be available for a minimum contract. So we can project some of the guys who are likely going to be available for minimum contracts, but there are going to be players who slip through the cracks, who teams don't spend the non-taxpayer MLE on, and then maybe don't even spend the taxpayer MLE on, and they become vet minimum players. So it's tough to say right now who the best option is going to be. I also think depends on how we want to break this down by position. From the center position, there's just not a lot of great free agents, and I think those guys are likely going to go for the non-taxpayer MLE or a majority of the non-taxpayer MLE. Remember, you don't have to spend all of the $14 million. You could spend part of it. So I think guys like Clint Capella, Steven Adams, Brook Lopez, they're either going to command that full non-taxpayer MLE or part of it. Maybe, depending on how much of a discount they're willing to take, they're available for the taxpayer MLE. But I think that's maybe Adams. I think Capella and Lopez will have more of a market above that mark. And then looking at the rest of the center market, it's uninspiring. A guy I like is Day'Ron Sharp, but I don't know if he's going to be a vet minimum player. Maybe he could get the taxpayer MLE from someone. So there's not a lot of center options for the vet minimum, in my opinion. That's where, again, a guy like Christian Coloco, if you could have him as your third string center, I don't mind that. Point guards, I think there'll be a little bit more of a market there. Chris Paul has been a name that's been floating out there. He would not be my first option as a backup. It would be more of a mid-tier backup option, in my opinion. And then wings, it's again, does a guy like a Bruce Brown get squeezed, or like who's the next Gary Trent Jr. that gets squeezed by the market and is available for a vet minimum? Chad Green says, would you trade Rui, DK, and a first for Ja? Yes, I would. I don't think Memphis would do that, though. Young Lito asked, do you think anyone signs D'Lo? I think he goes to the Orlando Magic. I think someone will sign him. I wouldn't be surprised if he re-signs on a short deal with Brooklyn, just because they have seemed to be fond of him. Obviously, this is the second time he's been with them, but even just them trading for him, and that there seems to be a mutual affection there. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's like a 1-year deal or maybe a 1+1, something like that, 2-year deal in Brooklyn. But I could see Orlando. I don't see him being a starting guard there. I think he would have to accept a bench role. But if he's willing to do that, then I could see Orlando as well. Dark Galaxy asked, does a 3-team deal make Kessler more attainable, Jovan? Yes, I think it probably does, especially depending on the asset going to Utah. If the Lakers can find a way to get a third team to give up an asset to Utah, and then the Lakers give that team an asset, and or maybe a team's really high on Rui or Gabe or Maxi Kleba as an expiring to get off some money, and they send that to the Lakers and they send an extra asset to Utah. Like, I think that could be the potential framework of a deal, but it's also more complicated anytime you add a third team. Team Hiatus, how optimistic are you that the Lakers do anything this summer? I am optimistic that the Lakers do something this summer because I think the big thing that I talked about with Pete Zayas on our episode ranking the biggest decisions for the Lakers this upcoming offseason is the Luka factor, and the fact that Luka, his extension date is a month into free agency. So I think that's something that if you're the Lakers, that there should be some level of urgency, some level of pressure to find that center of the future, or to at least upgrade the roster enough to appease Luka and to show him, similar to your intention with the Mark Williams trade, when you did the Mark Williams trade a few days after acquiring Luka, and you're trying to show him, hey, you gave us a list of the centers that you want to play with, that you feel you could partner with long term. We're going to go get you that guy. And it didn't end up working out because he failed the physical and they had to rescind it. But if you're the Lakers, I think you're still in that trial period to an extent with Luka. All indications are Luka's happy. He wants to be a Laker. I expect him to sign an extension, if not on August 2nd, some point early August. But that doesn't mean you can just rest on, well, we traded for him, we got him in-house. Like, we can slow play this. I think he's a guy who wants to win championships and wants to compete for championships and is not satisfied with losing in the first round in 5 games. So to go from losing in the finals and tasting that the deepest playoff run of his career, to then being traded and losing in the first round, like that's not going to sit well with him. So I think there is still an element of urgency and pressure with the Lakers and how they build this roster this summer. You also have LeBron, who's going to be 41, year 23. So you still potentially only have a 1 to 2 year window with this core of Luka, LeBron, and Austin. So you got to try to maximize that. And I think that urgency, with also factoring in multiple expiring contracts, 1 first round pick, multiple pick swaps, a second round pick, and Dalton Knecht. You look at all those assets plus the urgency factor. I think the Lakers will do something. Now, will they do something enough to vault them to like the Oklahoma City Thunder level or top 2 or 3 team in the league level? I don't know if that's possible. I mean, it's possible, but like I don't know if that's likely. I should say, but I think they're going to do something, and they're going to do something aggressive. And again, degrees of magnitude here of they're not doing the Luka trade again, right? Like they're not doing something to that extent, but I think they're going to do something. And again, I think there's some urgency and pressure with just his extension date being a month into free agency. He can watch how do they approach the draft, how do they approach free agency, what center do they get. What pieces do they add to this roster, and then make his decision. And really, there's no, outside of just kind of putting this storyline, to the side and sort of, putting it to bed. There's really, he doesn't have to sign the extension, right? Like he can play out an extra year and put even more pressure on the Lakers. So I think they do have some pressure here to show him we are serious about this partnership. We're serious about building around you, and to do that, we're going to go make a big move or two, be it a trade, a signing, whatever, to show you like we want to improve this roster, because clearly the roster is not good enough. They cannot just run it back. And if they run it back, that is a mistake in my opinion. And forget my opinion. It's like the proof is in them losing in 5 games in the first round. Like they can't just run this roster back. So I think something's going to happen. Now, how big that something will be, we'll see. But I think they probably have to make a trade and then also nail whichever exception signing they do. Adam, how do you feel about Alex Len? I think he is no longer an NBA caliber player. Purple gold for life. Do you think De'Anthony Melton would be a good target? I think he'd be a great target, a worthy gamble as a vet minimum type guy. Like he's a guy who has been, just was signed with the Warriors, right? And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was their non-taxpayer MLE signing. And he's been that caliber of guy of like I would say like a low tier starting guard or a high tier bench guard. And he is coming off of a significant injury, but it's the type of guy that I would take a risk on for a vet minimum contract. I do not think I would sign him to any, like if he wants the taxpayer MLE, I think that's too rich for my blood. I would not gamble on it. Like that's just too, like you only get one at bat with that exception. So he's not a guy that, just because of the uncertainty with the injury and how like that next year is always a tough year for anyone coming off of a serious injury. So I wouldn't risk it with the exception, but if you could get him for a vet minimum contract, to me, he's a worthy, dice roll. Mamadou, thank you for the super chat. Did you hear about the new statement jerseys and also bringing back the 2023-24 city jerseys? I saw there was some tweet or report about the new statement jerseys of like what the base of it was going to be. I don't know if I hadn't seen anything about the 2023-24 city jersey. So I don't know if you're asking me if I think they should come back or if they are coming back. I have not heard that they are coming back. I think teams typically, just the way that Nike has it, they cycle through the different city jersey editions. So I don't anticipate that happening. I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, it's not happened. Like teams will make variations to it. They might tweak the colorway or tweak a little bit of the design, but they don't they rarely bring back the exact same city jersey from a couple years ago. But yeah, I saw that report. I thought those jerseys were whatever. They seemed a bit bland, at least the ones that I saw, but I don't have anything new to report on the jersey front. Diego Cardona, who are your top 3 options for the taxpayer MLE? I would say if any of the centers slip, that would be my top option. And by the centers, I'm talking specifically Lopez, Capella, Adams. Probably, I'd probably rank them for me. Capella, Lopez, Adams. Lopez versus Adams is tough. I like Adams more as a backup center. I don't think Adams is a starting caliber center. I think he's one of the best backups in the league. But I think even if you look at how Houston used him, he was much more of like a high teens, low 20s type guy. And I don't know if you want to bank on him being your starting center. Like to me, he's a high level backup, but that might just be the best option the Lakers have. And if that's the case, then that's the best they can do. He's better than Jackson Hayes. So if the alternative is like bringing back Jackson and starting him, I would rather have Steven Adams as a starter. I think Capella is the best of those 3, and he's dipped athletically, but he still is a good finisher, not a great finisher, not a vertical lob threat the way he used to be in Houston and earlier in his Atlanta tenure, but he's still a good finisher around the basket, a really good rebounder, has led the league in offensive rebounds a couple times over the past 2 years. So that's one of his strengths. I think would help them on that end. Is more of a drop big, doesn't have the mobility that he used to have earlier in his career. So that's another, like with all 3 of these guys, they're all drop bigs. So that would affect how the Lakers play pick and rolls, and they don't quite fit into the defensive system that JJ Redick wants them to have. So that's a factor to consider. Lopez got played off the floor in the Indiana series, so I think he is a bit matchup dependent at this point. He is 37, but the floor spacing I think would be huge as a stretch 5. It allows you some lineup versatility there, and then is still one of the best rim protectors in the league. It's just he's limited in, again, drop coverage. He's slow. He's almost 40. So those are all factors. But again, beggars can't be choosers, and the Lakers have relatively limited options here to address the center market. So I would say any of those guys slip into that range or are willing to take a discount to sign with the Lakers, that would be my number 1 guy. I think 2 and 3 are probably Bruce Brown. I think as my second guy for the taxpayer MLE. I think if I could see him being a guy that he's bounced around a little bit now and has not, is kind of fallen off the radar a little bit since being in Denver. And if teams aren't willing to give him the non-taxpayer MLE and he has to take the taxpayer MLE, I think that's a guy that I would be open to. And then third guy, I don't know. That one's tough. I really don't like the. To be honest, I don't like the free agent class. Like, there's just not a lot of really good names. Like, I see Dark Galaxy says nah. I would be shocked. Like, nah would be taking a substantial pay cut. I think Nah is going to get the full non-taxpayer MLE. So he's going to be a $13-14 million player next year. So I think he's a guy that I would be stunned if he's available. Westwood says Melton is injury prone. Yeah, I mean, that's why a vet minimum, there's basically no risk. Like, I'd rather have De'Anthony Melton on a vet minimum contract than like a Shake Milton, because if De'Anthony Melton stays healthy and hits, you know what his upside is. Shake Milton, there's basically no upside there. I'm going to get back to you on the free agent list of the taxpayer MLE. Scrolling through quickly, I guess, is Dennis Schroeder available again as a backup guard, especially if you're flipping Gabe? Larry Nance Jr. I'm telling you, is not a. Okay, I'll give you my third guy. I would actually say is Gary Payton II. I really like Gary Payton II. I think he's a winning player. I think he's an intangibles player, and I think he would fit with what the Lakers are trying to do defensively. So I think I would go the center, whichever center potentially drops, and then Bruce Brown, and then Gary Payton II. Those would be my top three taxpayer MLE candidates. Kevin Cambridge, do we think Vando could develop a semi-decent jumper? Really like him, but the offensive limitations are frustrating. No. I think that the ship has sailed on Vando develop. I mean, like that's been the number one thing on the Vando to-do list for like the last, really throughout his entire career, but like the last 3 or 4 off seasons specifically, as he started to become a key rotation guy for whatever team he's been on, and he just hasn't been able to do it. So maybe he proves me wrong and he could do it, but I think at this point, if Vando was going to develop a semi-decent jumper, that would have already happened. And he puts in the work. I can attest to, like, he puts in the work. So I don't think that's in the cards for him. Denny third, CP3 on vet min. So I hit on it a little bit earlier, but what I'll say with this is obviously he had the Pat McAfee interview where he talked about being away from his family. His family's living in LA, and the breadcrumbs are suggesting that he is likely going to try to come back to LA and either play for the Lakers or the Clippers. He's been on the Lakers' radar for the last 2 years, and we know about the banana boat and his relationship with LeBron, and then he's a former Clipper, so that would also make some sense. I'm not opposed to it, depending on the makeup of the roster. Again, like I think the top 2 to 3 roster needs are a starting center, a new starting center, a new starting wing, and then a backup center. And if you only have so many assets to, like, you have one exception and then 4 to 5 or 5 to 6 tradable assets. So if you are spending those assets plus the exception to address those 3 needs, you might only have vet minimum contracts remaining. And at which point, if you are setting out potentially Gabe, can you replace Gabe with a CP3 on a vet minimum contract? Like, sure. In general, I think we're starting to see, like, one of the trends I've noticed in these playoffs, but really this has been going on the last, like, I would say few years in the league, is small guards it's really becoming harder to play them in the playoffs and in a playoff rotation more so than ever before. And I think as set, like, you know, the center position has come back, size has, the pendulum has swung, where size is the in vogue thing in terms of roster building, where, you know, after the Warriors, it was small ball and centerless basketball, and like wings are still important. But I think a guy like CP3 at 6 feet, like, it is hard to have that type of guy in your rotation. And he's no longer in his prime. He's no longer a plus defender. So that's like you're fat. Like, you have a basically 40, it was a 39 about to be 40, I think, 39, 40-year-old 6 foot guard in your rotation. Like, that's not my ideal backup point guard, just from a positional size perspective, right? So I would almost prefer him as like a backup kind of committee situation, where maybe it's him and Gabe, maybe it's him and someone else, maybe it's him and De'Anthony Melton, him and Gary Payton II, something like that. But like, I wouldn't want Chris Paul as like the primary guy necessarily. Again, it depends on how the Lakers build the roster. There are scenarios in which it makes sense. I would just say, from like an optimal perspective of what like the best case scenario looks like for the Lakers this offseason, I think you want guys like 6'4" and above. You want your primary rotation to be like 6'4" and above, with some except, like, I think Gary Payton II is a guy who has a long wingspan, is athletic, is tough, is physical. He he's like 6'2", 6'3", but he plays above, like, he plays more like a guy who's like 6'6", right? So that's maybe an exception to that. But for the most part, I think you want guys who are at least like 6'4" and above moving forward. Got you, Dark Galaxy. You're talking about for the full MLE, not appetizers and sushi. If we could get a assistant coach who, it's a good question. To go back to last summer, I really wanted Stan Van Gundy on JJ's staff, and that was a coach who obviously he played under in Orlando, and we saw the impact that Jeff Van Gundy had with the Clippers and remaking and revamping their defense, and he's gotten a bulk of the credit for how good their defense has been. And you saw Ivica Zubac go from being a solid to good defensive center to being an all defense level center this year. And I think a big part of that was, I mean, he just took a giant step in his career, but also part of that was Jeff Van Gundy. So I look at a guy like Stan Van Gundy, and and he just, I believe, signed with Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. So it looks like he's going the TV route, and that's going to be his path. But I think someone that JJ has a good relationship with, and I wonder if he could be that sage, assistant. I would look at some of the assistants or some of the former head coaches that were recently fired. Like if you could add a Tom Thibodeau as a defensive coordinator, high-end assistant. Like sometimes these coaches, if they can't get the job, and Tibbs obviously isn't going back to New York, and now New York seems to be going after Jason Kidd. So if Taylor Jenkins or Tom Thibodeau or even Mike Budenholzer, like those types of guys, I think they are still head coaching caliber coaches. And if you could get one of those guys even for a year, like I think we've seen this with Golden State, where Golden State has kind of become the rehab center for former head coaches, where a Mike Brown, a Kenny Atkinson, Terry Stotts is the latest one to go over there. But even going back earlier, like Alvin Gentry and Luke Walton got his coaching. Like it's been like the best place to be an assistant coach has been Golden State, where you're learning under Steve Kerr, you're part of that culture, and there's like a sheen to being an assistant in Golden State that helps you get jobs. And they've had a really good track record of guys getting work out of the Golden State system. I think for the Lakers, it would be nice to build something like that. And I think you want to have a balance of, you want the young up and coming assistants who are the bright minds, who are maybe a little bit more creative or unorthodox. And you want to balance that with the veterans. But you also, I think it's fine to have a coach on the staff who wants to be a head coach, because then I think there's a hunger level there, and almost them trying to reestablish themselves, that even if it is a bit of like a mercenary type position where they're just going to be there for a year, maybe 2 years tops, I'm fine personally with that being like a revolving door of, okay, Bud or whoever is going to, maybe Bud's like, I don't think Bud would do it anyway, but maybe a Tibbs or maybe a Taylor, like someone like that who can come in and help JJ with just some of the blind spots that he might have as such a young, and despite him not liking the term inexperienced, still an inexperienced coach who's only coached 1 year in the NBA. So I'm just throwing out a couple names. I'm not saying those coaches, like Tibbs, I think as a defensive coordinator, I think that's probably more of his strong suit, is just being like we saw it in Boston, obviously going back 15 years ago, 17 years ago. But I think he's more suited to be like a high level assistant, top end defensive coordinator. Taylor Jenkins was well regarded, well liked in Memphis. So like guys like that, I think if they could come in, I would be open to that. In terms of I think the biggest thing the Lakers need, honestly, is an offensive coordinator. I think a guy who can help find a way to figure out the optimal fit between Luka, LeBron, and Austin, keep the offense organized. I think David Adelman was a guy who would have made sense depending on how the Denver situation played out, but he obviously is going to be staying there as the head coach. So someone like that, I don't have a name off the top of my head, but I think either a former head coach who's looking to rehab their image for like a year or two could come in and make an impact with JJ in a positive way, or a high-level offensive coordinator, which, again, I would probably have to think more about that one. Michael Bliss Music. Anyway, we could get Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Capella. Almost no way. I think the one way would be some type of sign-in trade for Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but that would hard cap the Lakers at the first apron. And then Capella, maybe at the taxpayer MLE. I think he's probably going to be more of a non-taxpayer MLE. So maybe you're using the part of the non-taxpayer with Capella, and then you're doing some type of sign-in trade for Na. But that would require matching salary going out to Minnesota. Especially if it is above the non-taxpayer MLE, then it gets a little tricky and a little complicated. So I would say it's very unlikely to get both. But the Lakers would also have to shed some salary, potentially, depending on, again, like the way it plays out. I would say it's pretty unlikely. Tali Khalifa, Jovan, what do you think we do with Koloko and Jemison? Run them back as two-ways or cut? So Jemison is actually still under contract as a two-way, and I think the Lakers will be bringing him back as a two-way guy. Makes sense. They signed him to a 2-year two-way, so he's a guy who I would bring back and see how he continues to develop. Koloko is an pending restricted free agent as long as the Lakers offer him or exercise the qualifying offer with him, or extend it, excuse me. So I think they will do that and see what, how things play out with him. To me, it would be a mistake to just let him walk and at least not try to retain him. But I think Koloko makes sense as a 14th, 15th guy in the roster, third string center, and Jemison makes sense as a two-way guy. So I think both guys would tentatively be back. Dark Galaxy says, I'd rather get Exum than GP2. That's fair. I think GP2 is better personally, but I think especially if Exum's a minimum guy and GP2 is a taxpayer MLE guy, maybe maybe that contract difference offsets it. Let's see. Stephanopoulos, thank you for the super chat. Would you trade AR plus Shake for Jabari and Cam? No picks. I don't think so. I'm high on Jabari. I think you can make a case if you're Houston. I know this sounds crazy, but I think you're trying to keep Amen Thompson. I think you can make a real case that Jabari could or should be like the number 2 guy to keep in Houston. I think my big thing with Jabari that maybe we'll get a better read on next year or within the next couple of years is he just does not really have off the dribble chops right now, and both attacking closeouts, but also creating his own shot. And I think that for him to get to the next level, right now, I'm wondering if he just becomes more of a Michael Porter Jr. type. I don't even think that's the best comparison for him, but he is primarily a spot up catch and shoot guy, and like a stretch big. I see some Rashard Lewis in his game, and Rashard Lewis was a pretty good player. But I think the one thing I've tried to remind people of when they want to trade Austin is the Lakers offense was already not good enough with Luka, LeBron, and Austin. And for all of Austin's faults and however people want to view him or criticize him, critique him, whatever, he does give you a certain level of ball handling and playmaking and shot creation that the gap between Austin and whoever is the next guy in that position for the Lakers, which I think would technically be Gabe, because maybe Dalton for shot creation, but Dalton is nowhere near the ball handler or passer or playmaker that Austin is. And Gabe is several tiers above Dalton in that regard. So it's going from Austin to Gabe as your next best ball handler, shot creator, playmaker, passer, for the Lakers, like that's a huge downgrade. And you are not getting that with Jabari or Cam. You're getting some shot creation there and some scoring, obviously, right? But you are not getting that ball handler playmaker. And for as much, like obviously Luka could take on just more, right? But like already some people are upset. I see the comments and stuff of too heliocentric with Luka, and he has the ball too much and they need to run a different offense. And it's like, well, if you're taking away the guy who is helping Luka run the offense, like who are you replacing that guy with, right? Like, and so now are you asking Bruce Brown to be that guy? Are you asking Chris Paul to be that guy? Where are you finding that player who's going to help Luka run the offense? Because again, if you look at his 2 deep playoff runs, Jalen Brunson was the co-pilot in 2022, and Kyrie was the co-pilot in 2024. And of course, the Lakers still have LeBron, but they have moved him more off the ball, and I don't necessarily think the answer here is just more LeBron on the ball. I think you are trying to manage him to an extent deeper into the season. And even if you are doing more LeBron on the ball, more Luka on the ball, you still need a third ball handler. Like teams need multiple ball handlers. It can't just be 2 guys. So I think this creates a different hole that you have to go try and find, and you still have the center hole here. So I like Jabari and I like Cam. I think Cam is probably more of like a high-end bench scorer. That's to me more of his upside or kind of like median upside. I don't think he's going to become really like some all-star starting level guy, but I like those guys in a vacuum. I just think for Austin, if you're giving him up, I think the Lakers would want more. I think you could get more. And I think you would need some level of shot creation, ball handling, and playmaking. Game tight 8-8. Would you trade Reeves, Maxey Shake, and 2 pick swaps for Mikal Bridges and Mark Williams? Are you saying here Miles Bridges? Because unless you're saying a 3-team trade where you get Mikal Bridges and Mark Williams. I think the Mark Williams ship has sailed. You never want to say never in the NBA, but Charlotte dropping the statement that they dropped after the Lakers rescinded the trade did not seem to be very friendly in terms of the relations between the Lakers and the Hornets. So I'd be surprised if they circled the block with that one. Again, I don't know if you mean Mikal or Miles here. You mean Miles. Okay. Miles also opens up a whole thing that I don't want to get into, but there is a PR element to that we know about with his history that I think the Lakers would have to address if they traded for him. I don't think the Lakers would do this. It's an interesting trade though. I'll say this. I like where your head's at. I like the player archetypes that you are going after. I think with the history with Charlotte, I don't think Charlotte's interested in trading for the Lakers. I also think if you're Charlotte, do you want to pair Austin with LaMelo? Does that really make a lot of sense? You are keeping your first if you're the Lakers in this, but I like the idea though. If you are trading Austin, I want a big scoring wing and I want a center. Like I think that makes sense. Manas, if AR enters free agency, what's the max the Lakers can offer him? I think the max is like $42.5 million starting out that first year. So I don't think he's going to get that much, but I think he's going to get at least starting out at 30 million. Depending on how next year goes, maybe that's closer to 35, 37, but I think at a minimum and most likely it's probably somewhere between 30 to 35. Chase, do you think the Lakers would be interested in Alonzo reunion? I do. I think they would be. It's just a matter of what his price is, and you have to factor in the health and the history there of just you can't even pencil him in for 60 games. So whatever you're giving up for him, there has to be some level of a discount, or you factoring in like this dude might just play 40, 50 games. And how can we load? He's the guy you have to load manage. Like how can we load manage him to get to mid-April in one piece, right? David, you have asked this. What would a Suggs trade look like? A Suggs trade probably has to be Austin. I think there's a couple. there's a couple things for me with Suggs, or there's three things for me with Suggs. One, he's making a lot of money where it's probably like Austin and Rui is getting you in the ballpark of his, because I believe he's in the mid 30s. Let me pull up his contract here quickly. He is making, and I'm not saying I would do that. I'm just saying like how to salary match. I would not do. So he's making, why is this? Starting next year, he's making $35 million. He does have a descending contract, which is nice, but so you have to, and remember, if you take back more money, you trigger the apron. I think it's the second apron, if I'm not mistaken. It might be first. I need to write out all the apron rules. They get very confusing. But so Lakers have to match $35 million in salary. They're not like, they're clearly high on Suggs. So like he's under contract for 5 more years. They're not just giving him up. So it'd probably have to be something like Austin or Rui, which I think is not something the Lakers want. I don't even think they'd want to do Austin for Suggs straight up. My other two issues with Suggs, and I know he's been a popular name that's been thrown around. One, if you look at his career, he's incredibly injury prone, and he's another guy that you can't pencil in for 60 games every year, 65 games. So like, I think Austin's been Austin has been pretty durable and plays through injuries. And again, we could debate whether Austin versus Suggs, who you think is the better player, who you think is the better fit. But Austin has been more durable than Suggs through their respective careers. And the other thing is Suggs is not a good shooter. And I think the thing that you have to factor in when thinking about how a perimeter player is going to fit next to Luka is that player has to be a plus perimeter shooter. So Suggs has been a below average 3-point shooter. And I think that's, to me, a concerning thing within his potential fit with Luka. Like, he's a guy that I think right now in a playoff series, teams would just play off of and somewhat ignore. So that's the thing that I think. Okay. Antoine, thank you for the question here. Hey, Jovan, I love your content, man. You're an amazing journalist. Thank you. I appreciate it. I was just curious if you think Walker is a real option for LA this summer. Keep up the great work, man. It's inspiring. I appreciate that, man. I don't think he's a real option. I think if the Lakers had a second, I think what it would probably require, and I know this price is going to sound crazy, but I think it would probably have to be something like Dalton and 2 firsts for Walker, and the Lakers don't have 2 firsts to trade. So that's where it just, I barring the price dropping dramatically, and really, if you think about it, like, there's no reason for Utah to drop the price now. Maybe they drop the price at the February 2026 trade deadline. But, you know, I don't think he's realistic right now. Stephanopoulos, thank you for the super chat. Really think LA should direct their assets towards a 2-way wing or guard. Use tax MLE on bigs. Claxton or Gafford at 25 plus million doesn't move me. I'm open. Like, I don't necessarily disagree. I think I'm higher on Claxton than most because I think people are fixated with his weight and the perceived lack of strength when, like, he grades out well as a post defender, as a rim protector, as an interior guy. He's a really good rebounder, really good. Like, he checks on paper. If you just take away the name and the team he plays for and even the weight, if you just look at his strengths and his production and watch the film on him, this is a guy who, he's a lob threat. He's a good rebounder on both sides of the ball. He's a switchable defender, and he's a good rim protector. So, like, he checks every box for the type of center that you would want next to Luka. He's in that lively Gafford type mold. I think he's a better defender than both of them. I think Lively is the guy you'd want of the three the most, and he's also on a rookie deal, so that's a factor. But I think Claxton is better than Gafford, And another thing with Claxton is he's a guy who's played high 20s, low 30s in minutes. Gafford's a guy who, I don't know if it's a conditioning thing. I don't know if it's a foul trouble thing. I don't know if it's an injury thing. Like, there could be several factors that go into it. But Gafford, if you look at going back to Washington and then now Dallas, he's always been a guy in that 20 to 24 minute range. And I know part of it was Lively being there, but even in Washington, it was the same thing. Again, I don't know if it's been just circumstance and the coaches he's played for or whatever, but like Gafford has rarely crossed that like mid 20s mark in terms of minutes. And I'm not saying the Lakers need a center to play that much, to play 28, 32 minutes a night, but it's nice to have a guy who can do that if you need him to. I think Claxton's a guy who can play 36 minutes if you need him to, but could also play 22 minutes if you need him to, right? So I think there's just overall more versatility there with a guy like Claxton. I also like that his contract's ascending, and really $25 million for a starting center is not ridiculous. Most starters are $20+ million. I think he's a legit starting center. So I'm higher on Claxton, I think, than most people are. But to your point, like, I think there's a way to address multiple needs here, where I think if you look at the Lakers' primary assets, which are Rui as an expiring, Gabe as an expiring, Maxi Kleber as an expiring, Dalton, the first round pick, and then multiple pick swaps, you can do two separate trades with some combination of those contracts and those assets. And you could go get a center, and you could go get a wing, and then you could still have the $5.7 million taxpayer MLE and go find a player that way, right? So you could go get two bigs and use that on a wing. You could get a big and a wing and use that on another bigger wing, depending on what you feel like you need more. You could trade for two wings and then go get a big with that. So there's a lot of different ways the Lakers can approach this, but I think they have like realistically three like primary guys to add to this rotation. And I think you could do it with some combination of those 5 to 6 assets and then also your exception. And if you can find the right 3 guys to add, you can bring back most of last year's core, add 3 upgrades within the rotation. All of a sudden you have a deeper rotation. Now maybe you're 7 or 8 deep rather than being like 5 deep. And now I think that's a more formidable roster, both in the regular season, but also come playoff time. Just so you guys know, I'm going to go about 15 more minutes here. Madison says, if the right deal is there, no one is untouchable other than Doncic. Yes, that's correct, and I think that's how it should be. Ignacio says, watching from Uruguay, what up? Thank you for tuning in. That's I don't know what time it is over there, but I'm gonna guess that's the real late night gang right now. Appreciate you. Dark Galaxy says, trade idea, Magic get Sexton, Lakers get KCP and Kessler, Jazz get Gabe, Maxi, Knecht, 16 and 25 pick, 2031 pick, 2028 pick swap, 27 protections lifted. They could trade Knecht for a first round pick. I like it. I think Orlando probably says no, just because they're giving up. I mean, you're getting off KCP, but you're giving up 2 first round picks to get off KCP. I'm glad you mentioned, because technically another asset that the Lakers have here, specifically with the Jazz, is the 2027 first round pick that they owe them, that they could lift the protections of top 4 protected. However, like on paper, the Lakers are not going to be a bottom 4 or even lottery team in 2027 with Luka. So I don't know how much value there is there, but I guess it's worth having that insurance. It's not worth like a pick or even a pick swap, but it is something nice that they could offer the Jazz. I think the Lakers do this, and I think the Jazz would have to strongly consider this, getting 3 first round picks, a pick swap, and the protections lifted for Kessler and Sexton. But I think the Magic are probably the ones who say no here. Antoine says, on the day you woke up for your job interview with The Athletic, how nervous were you, if nervous at all? I was very nervous. It was my first beat writing job. So I knew there was an element of having to sell myself, and my prior experience as an editor at Fox Sports and ESPN, but then also my experience starting in college up to that point, freelance writing for ESPN and covering a bunch of games for them, a bunch of practices. So I was confident I could do the job, and I think hopefully it has been proven now 7 years later, but certainly nervous on, anytime you're trying to present yourself in a certain light and that you haven't done the thing that you're interviewing for, and you have to sell yourself to an extent or convince them that you're capable of doing it. There's always an element of nerves, but I think I will say I think I tend to interview pretty well. Most of the jobs I've interviewed for, I've gotten. So so in some ways I was like fairly confident that if I was given the opportunity, I could do it. It was just figuring out a way to convince them of that. But I also spoke with, one of the co-founders during my interview process. So it was a pretty big deal, and that I was certainly nervous about that. Jake from State Farm, what do you think Brook Lopez will do this offseason? He's an interesting one for me because I think he is clearly tied to Giannis to an extent where if Milwaukee just tears it down and trades Giannis, there's no reason why they should bring back Brook Lopez. And in that case, I think Brook Lopez becomes a non-taxpayer MLE target for whatever contender or playoff team is looking for a starting level center. So I think he probably goes somewhere I could see him ending up elsewhere for the non-taxpayer MLE. I think it's probably run its course in Milwaukee, but look, he is an Angelino. He is a Southern California native. So, is he willing to take a pay cut to play for the Lakers? Maybe. He also previously was a Laker, and I don't think that went as well as it could have. And Lakers sort of fumbled that one in terms of retaining him. So we'll see. But I like him. I don't love him. Kevin Cambridge, Jovan, how has your offseason been so far? It's been good. It's been definitely like taking some time and been traveling a lot. Had a wedding for one of my close friends in Mexico, so had like a 5-day trip there. Right after that, my son came out for summer break, so he's been out here for a little over 2 weeks. So just been trying to spend as much time with him as possible during the off season, especially like this point of the off season is relatively chill. There's not much going on. So before the draft, before free agency, before summer league, I try to spend as much time and as much uninterrupted time with him as possible. So it's been a good offseason. It's been relaxing and recharging, and then now starting to ramp up with the draft coming up in about 2.5 weeks. So it's just trying to dig more into the draft, also dig more into what the Lakers are going to do this offseason. But it's been a good one. It's been fun. Smokey says, Jovan, I think you're downplaying how much some players are getting paid, my bro. I think Lopez will get at least $14 million, and D-Melt will get 5.53 at least. Certainly possible. I would say that the one thing to factor in here is Brooklyn's the only team with cap space. So maybe they you can't sign guys to higher contracts if you don't have cap space. You could do a sign and trade. There are some exceptions to that, but in general, most teams are with the new apron structure and the new CBA, you're going to have to be using exceptions. So Lopez, if he is getting the non-taxpayer MLE, which I think at 37, as a guy who there are some concerns in terms of his mobility and versatility defensively in a playoff series, I have a hard time seeing him getting more than that unless it's staying in Milwaukee or a team like maybe Brooklyn's like, let's bring him home on a, he's a franchise legend. Let's bring him home for a year or two, whatever. And they want to give him some money as a short-term thing. Maybe that happens. But like for most of the teams that are going to be interested in Brook Lopez and that he would fit with, the most they'll be able to offer him is the 14.1. D-Melt is coming off a major injury. So I don't disagree with him being worth that. I just think there is some real risk with that. So I think he should probably go for a minimum contract, but maybe there's someone who's willing to give him that $5.7 million taxpayer MLE. I personally would not want to give him that, but if he gets it, like obviously more power to him. Bronson, do you think the Lakers try to get another draft pick this year? I could see them buying or trying to trade into the early second round. That's the Lakers playbook every year. They try to do that. So maybe this year they do that, but I think first round pick is going to be tough. Like unless you got it. I mean, there are some teams that are multiple first round picks, so maybe they're willing to sell it or whatever. Like you technically have to trade something. Maybe they trade their second in cash, but then also that also triggers one of the aprons and it gets a little complicated. But I would say a second round pick would be more likely. Tony PR, Boricua. What up, my Boricua hermano? Tilly Khalifa asks, Jovan, how's your Mexico trip? It was really good. The one thing, and I know there's been several people who have commented about San Miguel. It's just difficult to get to. So we flew into Leon, and it was like on the way there, long story, but ended up taking a detour. And it took 3 hours to get to our hotel. So it was like, use my Delta. One of the perks of being a beat writer, we get the Delta miles, Marriott points. So paid for the hotel with my Marriott points, paid for the flight with my Delta miles. But the thing was, there was no direct flights with my Delta miles. So we connected through Mexico City. So overall it was like 4.5 hour flight, but then it was another 3 hours in car in like, just, it was a pretty rough car ride on the way there. And then way back, it was 2 hours. But other than that, it was beautiful. Like it was a gorgeous wedding, gorgeous venue. It was nice that they had, similar to our wedding, they had their wedding like at the premises that they were staying. So it was like everything was just there, and all my closest friends were there, and ended up turning it into a little mini vacation. So it was a very nice time. Walter White, if we can get Andrew Wiggins for Rui and something would be good fit for us. Wiggins is natural 3 and Rui is forced to play the 3. I like that trade. I know Wiggins has been a popular guy for Lakers Twitter. He is someone that I think among the realistic options, he is someone that would check a lot of boxes for the Lakers. And your point on Rui is a big one, just because I think it's no shade at Rui. I think Rui was the Lakers' 4th best player this year. I think I've said before, has been forced into some difficult situations defensively where he's guarding Ant or Shea or, just guys he is not really equipped to guard, and he's held his own to an extent in those situations. And I think Rui is a 4, and his biggest issue is one that's out of his control, which is that the Lakers' 2 best players are both 4s defensively in LeBron and Luka. And by nature of that forces him to play out of position. And then there's also some defensive limitations with Austin, and that forces a lot on Rui's plate as well. So I think the Lakers I think Rui can be a starting 4 somewhere else and be in a situation that better suits his skill set. And I also think that a guy like Wiggins or someone of that ilk could come in and plug some of those holes as a more natural wing defender. Dark Galaxy says they have too many fours: Luka, LeBron, Rui, DFS. Yes, and I think a key distinction here is that those are 4 of their top 5 players. Like it's not, it's fine to like if DFS and Rui were, if you had a deeper team and those guys were like bench players and not as important as they were to last year's roster, that's one thing. But we're talking about 4 of their 5 best players. Their closing lineup, which ended up being their starting lineup late in the Minnesota series, was 4 power forwards plus Austin. And that's just not the optimal lineup construction that you want, especially when like none of those guys, even if you, it's one thing also if like they're power forwards who can have some level of versatility defensively. And like, I think LeBron and Rui both did good jobs of scaling up and down and guarding different types of guys. But for the most part, their primary positions are the 4. And if anything, it's like maybe DFS scaling up to guard 5s. LeBron could scale up to guard 5s. Even Rui, depending on the matchup, can scale up to guard 5s. Those guys, I think, have more trouble scaling down to 3s and 2s. And Luka is not going to be guarding those guys either. So there's just a limitation there to, I think, how good this group could be. And that's why I give JJ a lot of credit for what he was able to extract with this group in the regular season, because I think they were punching far above their weight with just the defensive personnel and some of the limitations they had. So, yeah, I think entering next season, they should only have 3 of these 4 guys together. And based on Rui's contract situation and DFS's contract situation and relationship with Luka, I think Rui's probably the odd man out. Mateo's World, anyone have interest in them grabbing Jay Huff if they can't grab a center? Well, I would say they shouldn't have botched that situation to begin with, but hindsight's 2020, I guess. And you got to give Memphis credit for developing him. But yeah, I would like Jay Huff. I don't know if he's like a primary backup center. I think he's more of a, like we talked about Christian Koloko earlier. Could you have Jay Huff and Christian Koloko as almost like a committee type center situation? I'd be interested in that. Mel Gibson with the mellow avatar. Rui, Gabe, and a first for Gordon. Denver needs assets and more rotation players. I'd do that in a heartbeat. I don't think Denver would do that, but I would do that in a heartbeat if I'm the Lakers. Dork Vader Jr. says, let's trade Austin Reeves, Gabe Vincent, bring in Herb Jones, De'Anthony Melton, and Gary Trent Jr. So I'm guessing you're saying Austin and Gabe for Herb. Herb and Trey Murphy are 2 interesting types of guys if you're trading Austin. I don't think the Lakers would do that, though. Smokey, now you look back at it, that Mark Williams deal was kind of sweet, Jovan. I gave it a B+ A- grade at the time, so I was for the Mark Williams trade. Dark Galaxy, I'm not trading AR for Herb Jones by himself. I'm with you, and I don't think the Lakers do it. Jake from State Farm, how much do you think Kuminga will be getting? That's a really good one. I don't know. I think he's getting at least 20. It's hard to give it. It's hard to justify more than 25. I mean, maybe like 18 to 25, and I'm talking annually, not overall. But I could see something like 480, 485. Mel Gibson, Jovan, do you hang out with Luka and LeBron in the offseason? I do not, although I talked with Luka about potentially seeing him in Serbia when he's going to be there with Slovenia for Eurobasket, but I wouldn't say we hang out. But maybe we'll hang out this summer. We'll see. Golden, how much would it cost to get Thibault? Let me pull up his contract. I think you asked this multiple times, so sorry for... I'm going to wrap in 5. Already went over a little bit, per usual. Dusting off the cobwebs here. He's got a, 11.5. He's expiring. I mean, could you flip Gabe and something for Thibault? The Lakers the tough thing for the Lakers right now is that they don't have a lot of seconds. So like ideally, could you do Gabe in a second for Thibault or something like that? Gabe in a couple seconds. That would be interesting. They just don't have that. Walter White, you'll cover the Slovenian national team. No, I would just, it would be in Serbia. I would be out there to see family, but potentially maybe then covering the game just cause. Dark Galaxy says Sergio Scariolo. I don't know how to pronounce that last name. Should be the assistant they hire for offense, Spain pick and roll creator. Well, that's, I love me some Spain pick and roll. Antoine says, who's your personal favorite player of all time outside of LA minus Pete Maravich? I mean, the Shaq count, obviously was a Laker, but played in Orlando, Miami, a bunch of places. If not Shaq, I mean, if we're saying a player who's never played for the Lakers, my favorite player would be Jokic, but that's because, I mean, there's a clear, I'm half Serbian, he's Serbian, like there's a clear connection there, but I mean, my three, I've said this before, my three favorite players of all time are Shaq, LeBron, and Jokic. Those are my three favorites. Two of those played for the Lakers. Okay, I missed the super chat. Raphael asks, can we get Zion for cheap? I don't think so. They got Dumars in there. I don't think they're giving him up for cheap. Okay, apologies. I missed a couple super chats. David Furman, ideal trade AR for Max Christie and Derek Lively. I've seen this one floated. This one's really interesting to me. And you guys know how I feel about Max, and I'm a big Lively guy. I think he has Tyson Chandler, DeAndre Jordan potential. So that's like those guys in their prime were defensive player of the year caliber guys. And I mean, Tyson Chandler won defensive player of the year, but defensive player of the year caliber rim protectors and also all-star level. DeAndre Jordan was on an all-star team. He was also on Team USA. So I think Derek Lively is cut from that same cloth and has that sort of potential. I would consider this. You would have to consider it again. I think it opens up an interesting hole for the Lakers where I think there is a real ball handling scoring hole. Like, again, I think that the optimal way to build this roster is to keep the same core and plug the other holes without creating more holes. But Max, obviously, as a 3-and-D wing, and then Derek Lively as a starting center, we have seen what he's done with Luka. Like that's a really interesting one. My guess would be the Lakers would probably want a little bit more, and Dallas would want more. I don't know if they would give up. I think they'd probably prefer to do this with Gafford and Christie rather than Lively and Christie, but the Lakers would want Lively. So that's where it's an interesting one where you can make a case that either side could demand more. Cisco, sorry for missing your super chat earlier. And thank you for the super chat. Beasley and Bullock, high draft pick rookies. Lonzo, JHS struggle in the limelight of LA. Are we underrating Connect? Are we going to regret trading Connect if he becomes someone like Tyler Hero somewhere else? So you're referencing Beasley, unless I'm missing, I know Michael Beasley and Malik Beasley both played in LA, but they were not rookies. So Bullock is Reggie Bullock, who drafted by the Clippers, but also played in LA briefly. Lonzo, JHS, of course. JHS I would almost put in his own category of these four, because like Lonzo's struggles, however you want to label them, deem them, are nowhere near the level of JHS was about to be out of the league as a second-year player, which is rare for a guy who's a top 20 pick. I think there is a chance we are underrating Dalton. I think that there's a couple elements to this. So one thing we have to factor in with Dalton is he's 24. So he is, or about to be 20. I forget if he's 24 or about to be 24, but I think he is 24 now. So he's already a bit older, right? So he's not a 20-year-old, a 21-year-old. That was part of why he slipped in the draft. So I'm not saying he's a finished product by any means, especially because he has such little NBA experience, has only played 1 year. I think he is someone who will continue to grow and get better, but I think this is a bit of a different conversation if Dalton was 21 versus 24. Like most of the time, he's much closer. I'll say he's much closer to being a finished product than a guy like a Tyler Hero, who was drafted and had multiple years to develop into. And Tyler Hero is actually, I think he's 25. I think Tyler Hero is 1 year older than Dalton for some perspective here. Hero's 25 and Dalton is, let me see if he is 24. So I think Hero's going to be turning 26, but like there's like, for comparison's sake, Dalton is closer to the age of Tyler Hero than he is to Max Christie. And Max Christie is going into year 4. So that just shows you Dalton's on the older side, and I think that does limit a little bit of his upside. I think the other thing here is that there are the defensive limitations, and when we're thinking about the Lakers' assets, and it's the expiring contracts, it's the 1 first-round pick, multiple pick swaps, but even the pick swaps I would contend aren't that valuable when you factor in the Lakers having Luka, and pick swaps have value if you think the team is going to be worse than you. And how many teams, let's say they're offering Utah, we'll give you Dalton, a first, and 2 pick swaps. Utah has to think that the Lakers in those years are going to be worse than them when it's like on paper, the Lakers are going to be set up for the next half decade with Luka. So those pick swaps aren't really that valuable. It's just like basically it comes down to the Lakers only have so many assets to trade, and Dalton Knecht, I think at best next season is like an 8th man, and probably is like an 8th, 9th man. And when thinking about the Lakers trying to get a starting center or a starting wing, you need to give something up to get that player, and it probably just has to include Dalton. And if you are not willing to include Dalton to get a starter, that's where, I mean, you could make that case. I just think you are lowering the ceiling on this team for a player. Like, you need guys who play defense. That's what, like, you need both offense and defense. I think the Lakers need more talent in general and more two-way talent, but I think there is a ceiling to Dalton's potential specifically for like next season. Whereas if you can go get a Claxton or a Gafford, that guy's starting and playing 25 plus minutes a night as your starting center. Or if you go get a Wiggins, like that guy's starting playing 30 plus minutes a night and is a big part of your rotation. Dalton, I just don't see a world in which he's more than like a 20-minute a night bench player. And that's like probably best case scenario. And because he has to make up the ground of like not being trusted. He did not play a rotation minute in the playoffs. To go from that to like being a 20-minute a night guy consistently and getting out of whatever doghouse JJ had him in, like that's a pretty big jump from the end of last season to next season. So I'm not saying he can't make it. I just think you have to trade something to get starting level players. The Lakers have limited assets to trade. So it just kind of comes down to, sure, in an ideal world, you trade other stuff and you keep Dalton and you have him be that 8th or 9th man. But if it's between the 8th or 9th man and like a starter, I think you have to pick the starter. You have to prioritize that. C2 cents. I think Kai Jones is a nice alternative to Jackson Hayes. He's an interesting one. I think Jackson's better, but depending on how things go. Steven says Hero just turned 25. So yeah, I mean, there's barely the Poster King says IQ Dalton problem. I agree, to be completely honest. I think if you look at the defensive end and the offensive end, him not remembering plays, like I think that's a real thing. Raphael says, I would trade AR for Jalen, Suggs, and Goga. Problem here is the money. If you want to do that, that's like $43 million in combined salary for those two. Austin's making 14, so you have to add in another 29 million, which you could get there with Rui and Gabe, but now are you doing AR, Rui, and Gabe for Suggs and Goga? I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I know how I feel about that. I wouldn't do that, but maybe I don't think the Lakers would either. All right, I'm gonna wrap here. Smokey. Jovan, would you trade AR for AB and Goga? I would not. F. Pendleton, Rui, Knecht expiring draft compensation for Claxton, AO, Jalen Smith, then hit the MLE. This is what, a three-team trade here. I like it. I'm indifferent on Jalen Smith, but I like Claxton and AO a lot. So I would do that. All right, I'm going to wrap here. Went a little bit over as expected, but I appreciate you all for rocking with me. I'm going to try to do a live at least once a week, so I'm going to try and hit another one this week. Either my guess would be Wednesday or Friday, but probably leaning more toward Friday. I'm also going to be doing another Buha's Block meetup. I'm tentatively thinking a week from now for Game 5 of the NBA Finals. Let me know in the comment section if you guys are interested in that. Would love to do another meetup and see all you guys in the LA area. And watch some basketball, because the first one we watched the All-Star game, but it was really whatever that was, if you want to call that an All-Star game. And the second one was in between the end of the regular season and the beginning of the playoffs, so there wasn't much to watch. But let me know if you guys want to do a Game 5 meetup in LA. But that'll do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back tomorrow with a new episode of Buha's Block. I'll also be back later in the week with a second episode and another live. I will talk to you then.